Hello, and welcome to Rediscover's first ever podcast episode. Today, we'll be discussing the effects of self criticism and parenting style on self esteem. We will be discussing these with a professional in the field of mental health, Mr. Julian Toy. If you have any questions to ask professionals coming on the podcast in the future, please let us know through our Instagram. Hello, and welcome to this segment of the podcast. I'm here joined with Mr. Julian Toy. He's a substance use abuse professional running private practice. He's an instructor at George Brown College, teaching students about alcohol and drug abuse. He also specializes in training companies to deal with alcohol and drug addiction. Okay, so we're just going to be asking you a few questions today related to our topic for this episode, which is self-satisfaction, self-criticism, and just the comparison between the two. So,
Got it.
First question. Can you explain the concept of self-criticism and how it differs from healthy self-reflection?
So self-criticism, it really depends. Like, we all have a voice inside our head that I guess you could say that talks to us and kind of guides us. So, the voice will say, geez, you really did that well, or, you didn't do that very well. When that voice becomes overtly negative, like, geez, you're really stupid, you know, you can't do anything right. If the voice is giving you messages that are pretty negative, I would say that is differing at that point from healthy self-reflection. If your voice is saying something like, geez, you made a mistake there, but you could have, next time you'll be able to do better, that would be healthy self-reflection. So the kind of, you're looking for a kind of dividing line between that, or trying to separate those two. I would say that if you have a really, the voice is saying stuff that, that you get offended about, if a friend said to you, then it's probably now at the side of unhealthy criticism. But if it's kind of gently poking you to do better and trying to help you improve, then that would be healthy self-reflection.
Okay, yeah, no, that makes sense. You have to be willing to accept, what your voice is telling you and not think of it as something that's negatively going to affect you.
Well, and some people who have that negative self-reflection actually have to learn to gently reject some of those messages, like especially if they're overtly negative, like, oh, you're useless, you can't do anything right. I've talked and I've worked with people where I've got them to actually literally kind of say, thank you for your input, but it's not welcome right now. I need you to not talk to me. And then because listening to that voice too much, of course, will cause you to feel depressed and cause you to feel uncomfortable. So sometimes you have to actually be a little bit more proactive and say to that voice, I appreciate what you're saying, but it's not really something I need to hear right now. Can you please go away? And then it would be much better, for instance, for you to consult with a good friend of yours who might be able to provide you with a little bit more positive encouragement and feedback rather than that overtly negative voice.
Yes, 100%. All right, next question. How might self-criticism spill into someone's relationships with others, and what consequences could this have with their relationship?
Well, self-criticism, I mean, it can do absolutely horrendous damage, including, completely destroying the relationship with another person. Uh, can you repeat the first part of the question? There's two parts to that question.
Yeah, of course. How might self-criticism spill over into someone's relationship with others, and what consequences could this have?
Okay. So ways that self-criticism could spill over into a relationship with somebody else. Okay, I'm going to generalize and kind of talk about all relationships. So you could have romantic relationships, you could have friendships, you could have partnerships. There's all business relationships. If you're overtly self-critical, one of the ways that it could affect relationships with others, for instance, if you were listening to an over critical voice, kind of like what we were referring to earlier, and it was reducing your self-esteem, one way it could affect your relationship with others is that you might be willing to put up with things that are not healthy for you. So if you're already feeling low self-esteem because you have kind of an overtly negative self-talk, like we discussed earlier, having that low self-esteem, you might be willing to tolerate behavior from people in your personal and interpersonal relationships that otherwise you wouldn't if you had higher self-esteem. So you might be more willing to do things that you're not comfortable with. That, for instance, you're a teenager. If you have friends who want to do something that you're not comfortable with, if your self-esteem and your self-efficacy is a little bit low, you might kind of be dragged along by the crowd to go and do whatever they're doing because you don't have the confidence to say, hey guys, this is not my bag. You guys go ahead and have fun. I can't be part of this because I'm not good with it, right? So that if you had healthy self-esteem and your self-esteem was adequate, you might be able to refuse an invitation to do something you're not comfortable with. If you're feeling low self-esteem, you want people to like you want your friends to accept you, so you may be more willing to go along with things that you don't believe in and or are uncomfortable with, but you're actually forcing yourself to do it because part of you needs that validation to improve your self-esteem because you're not getting it internally. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, that's perfect. I understand. Your own self criticism can heavily affect your relationships with others. It might make you do things that you're not comfortable with, and yeah, it's not a good thing. All right,
And
moving
then
on.
and then
Oh,
and then
sorry.
to add on, sorry, just to add on to that point that I made, in I mean I've dealt with many people with serious drug and alcohol addiction, and I've had alcohol and drug addiction myself. So I can tell you from personal experience that over time, when you acquiesce and do things that is not in your nature, because if I'm drunk, I'm going to be doing stuff that I would never do sober, or if I need drugs, I'll lie, cheat, and steal to get drugs, which is completely against my nature normally. What it does is it actually acts as a vicious circle and erodes your self-esteem even further. So then you're even more likely to do stuff that you're not comfortable with, which will, you can see that that's become kind of a vicious circle now. So if you're already feeling uncomfortable and you acquiesce to stuff that you're not comfortable with in order to get acceptance from others to boost your low self-esteem, that self-esteem after that will actually be lower, because then you're going to say, well, I can't believe you did that. Why would you do something so against your nature? And then that would in turn make you more likely to be suggestible to other things that you're not comfortable with. So uh, it could turn into something, like a vicious circle if not dealt with appropriately.
All right, perfect. Perfect. So, moving on. How can self satisfaction be utilized to address unhealthy self criticism?
Uh, wow. The thing is, self-satisfaction and self-criticism, absolutely, they live in the same, I have both parts inside me. I think we all do. The parts that can be fair and kind of recognize when we do good things, and the part that might be a little bit harsh in the criticism. That I've always heard the saying, and you may have heard this as well, that I'm my own worst critic, meaning that I will criticize my actions far harsher than you ever would, or even an enemy of mine would, because anything that I say with my internal voice, I believe, right? Uh, so, but also the opposite is true. If I'm feeling confident and I'm feeling uh, positive self-esteem, I can use that to for techniques like I was explaining to you earlier. So if I have that voice, if I made a mistake, for instance, and I have that voice say, "Oh, Julian, you really made a mistake. You messed that up badly." I could say, "Okay, well, hold on a second. True, I made a mistake, and I messed that up. However, I've learned from that mistake. I'm applying it to the next time that I'm going to be in that situation, and I'm going to do better." So you can use it to kind of counteract that. Uh, if you have kind of that overtly negative side, you can use positive. What was the term you used? Use positive self-esteem. What was the term that you used? Is that
Positives.
correct?
Well, I use self
Self-reflective?
satisfaction.
Self-satisfaction.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just going to make that synonymous with good self-esteem. So if you're satisfied with yourself, um, you can actually turn negativity into self-satisfactions. For instance, if you're if you've tried something new and you haven't succeeded to your liking and you're a little bit critical of yourself, you can sometimes have a friend come along and say, geez, Julian, you actually did really well on that, even though it didn't accomplish exactly what you did. And all of a sudden, just getting a perspective from somebody outside yourself can often change the way that you're thinking about it. And in that case, you could actually view something as that you once thought was negative and kind of a something you were using to kind of flagellate yourself or beat yourself with. You could actually turn that into something that you felt good about if your perspective changes. And sometimes having a close friend or somebody who can support you, that's why the friendships are important, because often that people outside, you can see it much more clearly than you can yourself. And sometimes with even just a couple of words, they can change your perspective on a situation.
Yeah, all right. So now, uh, I completely understand that, you have to use your own self satisfaction to help yourself have a good sense of self esteem. And all right, moving on to the next
Well,
question. Oh,
you
sorry.
can use, hold on, you can use your own sense of self-satisfaction. That's correct. But also, I do want to emphasize the importance of having people around you who are outside of yourself, because being able to do it with your own self-satisfaction, absolutely, you can do that. It takes a lot of practice, and it's not as easy as just making up your mind to do it. It takes a little bit of work to do that. So sometimes, especially in the beginning, it might be good if you talked over with a friend or a colleague or someone that you trust to help get that perspective. I think we all need that outside perspective, no matter how well I know myself. I have friends around me who can see traits that I don't even know that I have. And I'm sure you've experienced that, where a friend has said something to you and you're like, what are you talking about? I'm not like that. And they're like, yeah, you are. So having that outside perspective, especially in the beginning, can be important.
Okay. Now, last question for this segment is what advice do you have for friends and family members who want to support a loved one dealing with self esteem issues linked to self criticism?
Oh, wow. Well, I would say to them, no overt criticism of the person for sure. Like you wouldn't want to be using, like, if there's something that can improve, you wouldn't be saying, "Oh my God, you did what?" Like, you wouldn't be approaching it like that. You would say, "Geez, I noticed that you did that. Have you ever considered trying this?" Like, it's the way that you approach it can often make a huge difference. Um, so when you're communicating, you only understand about 14%, or like 10% of what I say is the words I speak. It's verbal and paraverbal, so it's my tone of voice, my inflections, and the way that I actually talk, that you actually get the message of how I'm feeling. So I can say to you, hi, how are you doing? I can say, hi, how are you doing? Or I can say, hi, how are you doing? And all three things are completely different because of the way that I've modulated my voice. So for friends, loved ones, and family members of someone struggling with low self-esteem, I'd say try to develop a kind of a relaxed tone of voice when you're talking with them, and not overly excited, not loud. And instead of uh, pointing out what they could have done better, you can sometimes just listen to them or talk to them and let them share with you. And sometimes just the act of listening, if I said to a friend, geez, what's on your mind? And I just sit back and listen without changing anything, without fixing anything, that can be very, very healthy. Because as a counselor, it's funny, you know, you think, well, listening, what does that do? But the actual act of listening shows the person that you care, and it's them knowing that you care is actually helping them, because that makes them understand that they're worthy of being cared for. So, to friends, family members of someone who's struggling with negative self talk, I would say listen to what that person's saying. Listen to them. That would be the most important thing. And support them. And one of the ways to support them is by certainly not adding to their burden by suggesting things they could have done differently, but listening to what they've done and pointing out positive stuff that they may not see either. So sometimes if they've done something positive, jump on that and say, hey, geez, you really did a good job there. Any little opportunity that they had to kind of be positive with that person would certainly be helpful.
Okay, perfect. How do parenting styles influence children's mental health, and how does encouraging gratitude address these effects?
So, when you talk about parenting styles, could you give me an example of what you're talking about so I have a little bit more understanding of
So
what you want me
let's
to?
let's consider more of like an authoritarian parenting style rather than
Okay,
something more laid back.
so authoritarian parenting styles versus laissez-faire parenting style, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
And okay, so to contrast the two different parenting styles with the way they affect self-esteem, is that what you're looking for?
So it's more how they influence children's mental health and how gratitude
Okay,
can address these effects.
authoritarian parenting style. So I'm right, you're wrong. Sit down, shut up, and listen to what I have to say. That kind of parenting style, it really does stifle growth in children because they don't feel comfortable to express their own views. They're more interested in changing their behavior to match what the parent wants. So I guess, you know, like I'm not a parent myself, but if I was, what I would want for my children is I would want them to follow the path that means the most to them. So I would want them to explore and choose careers and friends and a path that resonates within their heart, not one that resonates within mine. Because I'm a parent and I have particular things I like. So as an authoritarian parent, what will happen is that, and I actually grew up with that authoritarianism myself, so I could tell you from personal experience, what happens is the child desires to emulate the parent. So the child wants to behave like the parent to get the parent's approval, because all children want the parent's approval, no matter whether the parent is abusing them, whether they're authoritarian, whether they're laissez-faire. The thing that a child desires very strongly is to have positive feedback from the parent and approval from that parent. That's essential to their mental health, their self-esteem, and their well-being. So if you have an authoritarian parent, the child's going to try to emulate that parent. They will be authoritarian with their friends. They're going to be in school and be authoritarian to people weaker than them or people who they can influence. And it will definitely cause them personal conflict because of that. If you have a laissez-faire style, which is the exact kind of opposite of authoritarianism, whereas a parent's like very laid back, it's not good either, because kids do need discipline, they do need structure, they do need rules to follow. Without rules to follow, kids are lost. They feel lost, and they will make their own rules that aren't necessarily very good or well thought out, because everybody needs structure in their life, no matter what kind it is. So between those two kind of styles, you have authoritarianism on one hand and you have laissez-faire leadership on the other. You would have a balance. So what you would have is a supportive parent who has very clear expectations, but also understands that it's a child and that they make mistakes, and support them through those mistakes in a very positive way. Gratitude on the part of the parent, I'll talk about gratitude in both parts. Gratitude on the part of the parent. Let's say the parent's grateful to have a child. They're very grateful. They feel blessed that they have a child that's healthy, or they have a child, let's say. So when you have gratitude like that, it changes behavior. Gratitude changes behavior. So when you view the cup as half full, it colors your view of the world. If you're feeling happy about the way things are, that's going to translate into your mood. You're going to feel comfortable, confident, you're going to be relaxed, you're not going to get angry very easily when you're feeling grateful, if a parent's feeling grateful. And that will directly affect the mental health of the child, because they're going to be directly exposed to that. If the parent's relaxed, if they're serene, if they're feeling good, if they're happy, that's all that energy the kid's going to pick up on, and it's going to have a very beneficial effect on their self-esteem. And most likely what will happen is, with the parents sharing their philosophies and why they feel grateful, that child will also grow up with very similar philosophies, and that will be a very strong protective mechanism for their mental health. Authoritarianism the reason that parents are authoritarian is because they're fearful. So if a parent's fearful that a kid's not going to turn out well, sometimes what happens is they try to control that kid very, very closely because they're afraid that it's not going to turn out well. The kid's not going to do what they want. The kid's going to get in trouble. They could. So if you care about something so much that you have a tight grip on it, usually what happens is it slips through your fingers because you can't control somebody that tightly. You can do it for a while, but eventually, once that child gets old enough, they're going to reject that kind of control, and they're going to go off on their own and do what they want. So the authoritarianism, it's kind of opposite to having gratitude because they're fearful, and usually that fear creates anger. Whenever a person's angry, it's usually from something they're afraid of. So uh, an authoritarian parent likely would not be grateful very often, because of the nature of that kind of parenting style shows that they have so much fear going on, and they have so much kind of going on in their head that they don't really have an understanding of how to be relaxed, how to chill out. It'd be too difficult for them to do that without some kind of serious help. I don't know if I answered exactly what you were looking for
No.
there.
Yeah, you perfectly answered the question. Yeah, I understand, child has to be raised in a way that helps them become who they are rather than who their parents want them to be. And yeah,
And you've
that's
seen examples, I'm sure, like I know that I've seen examples of that even from my friends, where they'll be disappointed if their child chooses to do something, but it's not about the child, then it's about them, right? It has to be. I mean, I'd like to think that if you love that love translates into letting something go. I mean, at an appropriate age. I'm not talking about a toddler here. We're talking about a child kind of more or less your age, I would say, teenager or early, mid-teens. You have to let them do what they need to do. You have to let them spread their wings and kind of explore on their own, and without a lot of influence. Like you don't want to influence them too much, because otherwise your personality could drown out that budding personality of the child, right?
yeah, yeah. Okay. Moving on. How does practicing gratitude within a family environment impact a teenager's overall health and well-being in terms of self-esteem, their mental health?
So a family that practices gratitude, the kids are naturally, physically, they're going to be healthier. There's a definite link between mental health, you know, uh, feeling happy and content. They say laughter is the best medicine, right? For a reason. It definitely has a salutary effect on your mental health. It affects your physical health. When you're feeling good in your mind, it can translate to all kinds of benefits. A family that practices gratitude, their children would be practicing it as well, because usually gratitude would be done as a family. Like, for instance, if they're saying prayers at night, let's just say if they have a particular religion and they're saying prayers and they're giving thanks for what they have, the child often would be part of that as part of the family saying prayers. So the child's going to be directly involved in that whole gratitude thing. Again, people feeling grateful usually are feeling happy. When, if I feel content with what I've got, I'm usually not going to get angry. When I get angry, it's because there's something that I'm not getting that I want. I'm worried about losing something that I already have. I'm pissed off because someone's not doing what I want them to do, but I shouldn't be trying to get them to do what I want in the first place, right? So the grateful family, if you use that, I like the way you use that term, having a grateful family, would definitely translate into a like very positive mental health for the kid, which would definitely influence their physical health, but their mental health would be excellent, and it would be a protective mechanism. So they'd be able to go into the world and deal with all kinds of people, whether they're negative, authoritarian, no matter what, and they would have a base that would protect them from that kind of malign influence because of their gratitude.
Yeah, I understand. So, moving
I
on.
can't
Oh,
I can't
sorry.
hear you.
Yeah, yeah, I understand. So, moving on. In your view, what aspect of mental health and well-being tends to be underestimated or overlooked, especially when addressing issues like self-criticism and socioeconomic inequality?
Socioeconomic inequality.
Sorry,
Okay.
again, I think I read off the wrong
Is that
question. Ignore that. Let's re-record that. Yeah, thank you. Could you offer a professional perspective on how factors like self-criticism and gratitude influence mental health?
self-criticism and gratitude influence mental health? So self-criticism, uh, we all need to be able to criticize ourselves. I don't use the word criticism. We all need to be able to reflect on what we've done in order to change behavior. All of us need that. As human beings, we all need to be able to take a look at what we've done. And if we've made a mistake, we need to be able to admit that to ourselves. That's important. That's an important part of being human. People who are able to do that have many, many problems in life. People who think they're perfect and never make mistakes, I run away from those people quickly, like, because they have so many issues because they're pretending. We all need to be able to accept when we make mistakes, but we want to make sure that that line's not crossed where we're being overtly critical of ourselves and being negative, that would reduce our self-esteem, because at that point we're not really helping ourselves. We're actually harming ourselves with that knowledge. And gratitude is uh, is a trait to be fostered. Like, I actually have made a gratitude list on occasion when I'm feeling down in the dumps, or if I'm feeling out of sorts. If I actually try to make a list of stuff that I'm grateful for, like, I'll give you an example. Sometimes I get mad. Like, I have a motorcycle. Okay, I have a scooter, I have a bicycle, I have a car, and I have a motorcycle. I have four vehicles that I can use, right? I was angry because my motorcycle needed new tires, and I had to pay for that, and it was expensive. Like, that's a first world problem of the first order, right? Like, here I am upset that I have a motorcycle and I got to put new tires. So making a gratitude list, and usually what that consists of is, what do I have that I'm grateful for? I have, a family that cares about me. I have friends that I can trust. I have a roof over my head. I have food to eat. Like, these are all, things that can make you feel better and provide a protective mechanism when you get down in the dumps. So, gratitude is definitely an important component of mental health. Uh, Making a gratitude list, as corny as that might sound to some people, it can be a real protective mechanism. And I've actually done it myself. Like, I got onto the computer and I started typing the stuff that I'm grateful for. And, I can go through that list. And I actually might take my own advice today and actually do a little bit more after we get off this, make another list. But it definitely has an excellent protective effect on mental health. The self criticism definitely is something that we all need to have. We need to be able to recognize we make mistakes. We just need to understand that we don't want to take it to that extreme where it's pushing our self-esteem down.
Perfect. So I completely understand that, especially the gratitude list. So Rediscover, last month we made a post about how you should make a gratitude journal and just every day write down three things that you're grateful for. So it's
Really?
really good that a professional is backing up what
Are
we.
you are you do are you doing that? Are you doing a journal where you write three things that you're grateful for?
Well, here and there, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, understood. Hey, listen, sometimes it's easier to give advice than to follow. Do we have more questions that we need to do?
Yeah, so last question for the segment. Why do you
Sure.
think youth are particularly vulnerable to mental health challenges compared to other age groups?
Excellent. So, because youth, and I assume we're talking about school age, like in school, from public to high school graduation, say, right?
Yeah.
So, uh, youth haven't got their feet yet for their personality. They're still developing their personality, which makes them very vulnerable to self-esteem issues. Like I was talking about before, during the time when a kid is growing up, they're very focused on other people's opinions, particularly teenagers. It doesn't happen as much before teenage years, but between, 10 and 13, there's a shift in perspective where friends become extremely important to people, and what other people think about them is very important. So they're more vulnerable at that point because if people are around them that are bullying them, that have negative opinions, that aren't being supportive or positive, it's more likely to damage their self-esteem because they're still developing it, I guess. So when something's being developed, it's more dangerous. It's just like a fast dividing cell is more vulnerable to radiation. If you have something that's nascent, that's starting, it's much more easy to crush. It's like a seed growing out of the ground. It's, if you have a full grown plant, it's a little hardy, and it can take a little bashing around. But when it's just starting out in the pot, it can't take too much abuse, otherwise it's going to get hurt, right? So I think that the reason that youth are more vulnerable is just by function of the fact that they haven't found their feet as of yet with their self-esteem, with their personality. I mean, this continues throughout your life, understand? Like, I'm still developing and changing the way I believe, like, things. But during the youthful period, it's so much more vulnerable than it is to me now. Like, I could have someone, criticize me, yell at me now, and I could kind of brush it off and be like, yeah, it's all good. Don't worry about it. But when I was a teenager, no, that would have, I mean, I would have perseverated on that. It would have spun me out for days, and it would have been a real problem. So, because they're in development, that's the reason that they're more vulnerable. It's because it's developing still.
Thank you, Mr. Toy.
You're
Those are all
welcome.
our questions for this segment. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope you have a great day, and we hope to see you soon in future episodes.
Thanks. You too. So
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Rediscover podcast. We plan on having many more in the future, including one upcoming next month with someone very special. If you have any questions you would like to ask a professional in the field of mental health to be covered on this podcast, please let us know via our Instagram or in the comment section of this video.